are watching and listening to Bishop Brothers, a safe space where real issues being dealt with by real people are brought forth and discussed. Every week, the fire of love is lit as two 21st century bishops share the first century church message. Join and engage in the conversation, featuring grassroots interviews, book reviews, and God-inspired commentary. Here are your hosts, Aaron and John, Bishop and Bishop, Chief and Chief. But above all, they are brothers. Welcome aboard.
Guess who's back?
Yeah. We're not running the tape, right?
That's right. No, we're not running the tape. I know we tricked y'all. We tricked y'all. We got you good. We got you good.
Yeah.
Yep.
We definitely got a good, great topic to discuss today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great topic to discuss today.
Yeah. So, a question I got asked, and it's a good question. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very good question. I'm gonna pose it to you. I'll let you answer it. Someone asked me, the People series. Normally, you guys do prophets or someone in Scripture. And this season, we've kind of opened it up beyond just people in Scripture. So the first question that I got asked was, why did you do that? Mm-hmm. And then the second question I got asked, why Daniel O'Connell and Frederick Douglass? They weren't, in their public lives, they weren't necessarily known as Christians or theologians or theological leaders. Mm-hmm. So why are we talking about them?
Yeah. I would turn it back and say, why not? Well, no, it's just because, really an hour is really, 45 minutes, however long we're going to go, is really don't even do justice to these two great men. But I'm glad you asked the question because I've been thinking about this all day. Because I center their brief, it wasn't long, but the brief relationship on a word that we throw around, the F word, not that F word, but it's different.
Yeah. The
F word that we throw around that we really use real lightly, and that's friendship. Mm-hmm. And a shared bond of what the person was going through and dealing with their life. And it's finally, people find a shared bond of what we call a white man and a black man. Yet they had a shared bond, and that bond created a situation where they developed mutual respect for one another, unlike what we do today instead of tearing down. That's what I see. It was a great friendship, and it's no greater as far as how does it connect to the Bible or the Word of God. There's no greater connection to the Word of God, in my opinion, than the beauty of friendship and relationship. Yeah. And so it definitely connects to the Bible. Even though they're not printed in the Bible, it definitely connects to the Bible. Most certainly, their deep their friendship they had in such a short amount of time. So that's how I answer that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I would take it probably a step. I don't know necessarily a step further, but kind of take it down another avenue of, as theologians, as Christians, as people who live in the real world with real people and real problems. I think we kind of have to get out of this mindset of how does everything relate to the Bible. I think we need to get more in tune with how the Bible is applicable to the world now, how Scripture, how God, how that interacts. And I would agree with you. Probably one of the greatest examples we have of that, one of the greatest things that occurs in the human experience when we discuss God's interaction with us is friendship, right? And so friendships, especially those like these two, a friendship born out of strife and oppression. And it's easy to look back on Frederick Douglass and Daniel O'Connell with the rose-tinted glasses. In their time, in their contemporary times, these were not popular people with their governments. We hear about them in the history books all the time and how great an orator Frederick Douglass was, and he was. I'm not taking anything away from him or O'Connell. But the reality is they were very unpopular and we'll get into that in a second. At least, we definitely will with O'Connell. But they were highly unpopular as contemporaries. Only later did this relate. I mean, I don't know about your history classes, but no one ever told me that Frederick Douglass visited Ireland. Right. No one ever told me that was even a thing, or that he even knew Daniel O'Connell. So this friendship, and why talk about these two people? Well, I like your first answer. Why not? Right? And the reason it applies is these are two image bearers made in the image of God that came together for a common cause of the defeat of oppression. No matter who the oppressed person was. Whoever was in chains, those chains needed to be broken. And these are two people from very different cultures, very different walks of life. And their ability to come together for a common cause, although a lot of what they spoke about and what they desired did not happen in their lifetimes, the result of which is now. How is that not Christian? Jesus did something 2,000 years ago for me that I'm bearing the fruits of now. Jesus didn't know me in the sense that as a person on earth, Jesus didn't know me. But his struggle and the things that he fought for me and the things he gave me in his death and resurrection, I receive now 2,000 years later. And it's no different for me and you from these two speakers, right? The ability that we can even sit in a room together is because of thinkers like this. So I think it's very biblical and very important. Yeah,
and it always got to be in the Bible crowd. Always, I laugh because it's like, well, can we have a discussion about incest? What? No. Incest is in the Bible.
It sure is.
Can we talk about brothels and prostitutes? Yep, that's in the Bible. So really, when you talk about the Bible is the most comprehensive book ever known to mankind. It covers all aspects of life.
Yeah.
But the notion that it's always got to be tied to a character in the Bible, no, the Bible didn't capture everything. It's impossible for just those few men who wrote the Bible to capture everything. But in stories, we see the Word of God manifest in our lives. So you can see the Word of God manifest in the lives of these two men through stories, and that's why I love stories, because stories is what Jesus used really to transform lives. So, these men are more than worthy to be talked about, to be to be looked at and examined, and how they related to each other, particularly in the times in which they lived.
Absolutely, and I think that's where the story has to start. We have to understand where these two people were living in their own context. So, for Frederick Douglass, right, his context was much different than O'Connell's, but the struggle was kind of the same. So if you could just kind of walk us through kind of Frederick Douglass's background. I mean, some people may know, but, a lot of people may not know, because we have this habit of, even with Irish history, you have this habit of whitewashing it and only talking about very specific certain things about Frederick Douglass. Like, for example, I can tell you what did Dan learn? What did John learn about Frederick Douglass in high school? I learned that he was a former slave, and that I'm trying to think what else I was actually told. He wrote a lot. That's that is literally what I was taught in the one paragraph in this massive history book in the 90s. And I've learned a lot since then. But there may be a lot of people that really don't know much about Frederick Douglass, outside that he was a former slave that ended up becoming a very well-educated man.
Well, man, I'm going to start with a controversial statement about Frederick Douglass, because I'm not a Frederick Douglass scholar, but I studied a lot about him. In my opinion, in my study, I know a lot of people go to MLK and things like that. For my opinion, Frederick Douglass is the greatest American that ever lived. And I say that because this man was born a slave in Maryland, same area, around the same area that Harry Tubman was born. He didn't know his birthday. Grew up with in an environment of enslavement. Went to Maryland in his young life, where he was accidentally, basically, and not on purpose, pretty much taught to read by a slave master there, and went back. Had an incident with a slave master where he basically stopped the man from whipping him. I mean, I just don't, and I say this, I have no clue. When I do, it just amazes me how we don't have a major motion picture movie. You know, I know everybody wants movies, and I know it's cliche, but why have a movie we say that funny? But I just don't understand why this man, because his daring escape from slavery, the woman, Anne Murray, the woman who helped him escape from slavery, is one of the most greatest stories that you can know how he did it in a disguise of sailor, got in a sailor disguise, and wanted freedom, and he just became one of the greatest, not only writers, orators that this nation has ever produced. And a lot of Christians don't like him neither, because in his narrative, he really speaks about the church. He speaks about the hypocrisy in the church, how slaves and slave masters having communion together, and the slave master, sleeping with the slave Saturday night and preaching to the slave Saturday morning. He really breaks it. He gives you a slave perspective. No other possible way that he gives his narrative is a slave perspective of what the institution of Christianity was like during those times which he lived. And so, then he eventually meets O'Connell. When he meets O'Connell, he was actually on the run out of America because, of course, he was a slave. And he was one of the most prized slaves that you could ever come. He made the classic speech, and the people don't like to hear about on the 4th of July. What's the 4th of July to the slave? Great, one of the greatest. This is scholars from worldwide, global, that this is one of the greatest works, one of the greatest speeches in history. His brilliant breakdown and chastisement of the American culture system at that time. And so, for these two men to meet, it is great. But in his development, Frederick Douglass says he gives a lot to O'Connell for his development. But I mean, I can talk about him all day. He's just you talk about an American story that's shouldn't have been an American story. And I close with this. I quote all the time. I think about all the time. He said, people always, he's talking about that about obtaining his freedom. He said, I prayed for 20 years to be free. When I prayed with my feet, I became free. And I always, because some people pray on it, but you can pray moving. Prayer is just not a passive act. He was trying to say, but when I pray with my feet, then I obtain my freedom. So he's just one of, in my opinion, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. Yeah,
and a couple of things that are striking to me about Frederick Douglass is I do love that quote from him, because there's a whole sermon in that statement. I prayed for 20 years for something, but when I actually conducted with action, it occurred. And I think that's an important lesson for all Christians to learn. Is I'm not saying don't pray at night before you go to bed or before you eat a meal. I'm certainly not saying that. But what I am saying, though, is the prayer should evoke action. And that's where a lot of Christians and Christianity falls on its face, is we fall into the same issues that James has in his letter. Pray, be well, be fed, but we don't feed them, right? So, be free, but we don't free them, right? So there's a lot in there with that one statement. I think that he may not have been a pastor, but he certainly was a prolific orator, right? And he certainly had the ability to communicate things. And so, which is so odd if you look at, and no one is going to have the same viewpoint as Frederick Douglass, right? We're going to talk about a Daniel O'Connell's past, which is starkly different than Frederick Douglass's. No one outside of someone who's actually been a slave would understand fully what Frederick Douglass is talking about. We can read his writings and we can comprehend what he's saying, and it can give us a view into the life of a chattel slave in the United States before 1865. But you can't understand it, right? You can understand it, but you can't live it. You can't. There's a piece there that I'm never going to get. You may never even get.
Oh, no.
Because we didn't live like that.
You didn't experience it. It's about experience. You didn't experience it.
Yeah. Right. Now, O'Connell, starkly different in his upbringing. He is born to a wealthy family, right? He's a lawyer by trade, right? So he grows up in the southwest of Ireland. He's Catholic. He grows up in a Catholic family, which is really an oddity in Ireland at the time, that a Catholic family would be wealthy. And the only reason that O'Connell's family was allowed to be wealthy is because they had Protestant overseers that were actually titled the land. So they were allowed to make money off the land, but it was not their land. In the end, it did not belong to O'Connell or his family. Because they were Catholic, they weren't allowed to own land, right? So what a lot of people don't know about 1800s Ireland and before is that there were these penal laws that were designed to oppress the native Catholic population in Ireland and make them subservient to what was called the Ulster plantation of Scots that were loyal to the crown that came over. And so there were rules like Catholics could not own land, Catholics could not vote, Catholics could not be educated outside their parish. There were even rules on Catholic churches could only be made of wood and they couldn't be attached to the road. So they had to be off the road and made of wood, not stone. It's a lot easier to burn down if it's made of wood. So this is kind of the area that O'Connell grows up in, but he's unique because they're wealthy as Catholics. Which is really odd. So he becomes a lawyer, and 4 days after he passes the bar, gets called to the bar, in 1798, Ireland has a major rebellion against the British Crown. And so all this stuff he's worked for kind of gets tossed away because he's an Irish Catholic, and the Irish Catholics have just revolted against the British Crown. And what a lot of people don't realize about that time is Lord Cornwallis, who had just been defeated in America, his next post was Viceroy of Ireland. And so he was not going to allow what happened in the United States, in the colonies here, to happen there. So his response was absolutely brutal. I mean, he would go into Catholic towns and murder everyone. Men, women, children, because they were native Irish, right? O'Connell sees this. This is where I begin to have a lot of respect for O'Connell. Because O'Connell sees this. He could have turned a blind eye to it. He's got his money. He's got his law practice. He was educated in London. He's got friends in England. You know, he's a made man. But even though he's a made man, he sees that there is oppression occurring. And he won't let it go. And so he becomes... In Ireland, he's referred to as the Great Liberator because he spent the rest of his life trying to liberate the native Irish Catholics in Ireland, getting them back their land, their ability to, their ability to vote, their ability to have weapons, their ability to get educated, just to even have the church attached to the road, which seems like a small thing, but it's not a small thing. It's a big deal. So, to me, it's fascinating to me how these two meet up, right? They come from very different backgrounds, but there's this shared trauma, right? There's this shared trauma, and they end up becoming very close, and they knew each other for a very small period of time, but they were something just clicked, right? And I think it's that shared trauma, right? And the desire to make it better, to break chains, right? And so one of the things that O'Connell did that the Irish in America did not like was that he was vehemently against slavery. Yeah. He was a rabid abolitionist because he saw no difference between how the Catholics were being treated in Ireland and the slave was being treated in the United States. Right. They both were considered non-human, subhuman, right? And so he was dead set on doing that. But what he noticed is that Irish would leave Ireland and they would come to the United States. And they would no longer be under the shackles of British oppression. And they looked like the ruling class. They were white. They looked like the ruling class in America.
Right.
And so because of that, they changed. Everybody, Irish in Ireland were very anti-slavery. They were abolitionists, but they would come here, they would get part of the system, and they wouldn't be on that bottom rung anymore.
Right.
And all of a sudden, they were just go with the flow, right? Mm-hmm. And O'Connell is quoted as saying about Irish Americans, passage to the United States seems to produce the same effect upon the exile of Ireland that the forbidden fruit did to Adam and Eve. In the morning, they were innocent, and by nighttime, they were guilty. Mm-hmm. So, and Frederick Douglass had a quote about the same group of people, my group of people. He said, the Irish who at home readily sympathize with the oppressed everywhere are instantly taught when they step foot on our soil to hate and despise us. Mm-hmm. The black people, slaves. Mm-hmm. So he uses another word. I don't say that word. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So they had this... And by saying that, they both became very unpopular. Mm-hmm. And O'Connell was hated in America. Right. Absolutely hated.
Yeah, it showed the power of these two men. And, it's just, people don't understand, we are all creatures of our times. And the times in which they live, you either rise to your moment or you fall to the moment. Or be complacent in the moment, but you're gonna find a place. And even in our times right now, the great issues all the time, COVID and all that kind of stuff. History's gonna judge us as we're not judging, but we're discussing these two men. And the beauty of these two men is they was able to articulate how they felt, what was going on in the moment. It's easy for me to say, how you just broke down how the Irish thought this way when they came here, when they was there, but this one they here. Because it's a strange thing about power. Oh man, I don't want to do I don't want to do a spoiler, but I'm gonna do a spoiler. So I was watching House of Dragon.
Pastor Bishop.
Classic line. I'll never forget. He said it was this character. I ain't gonna say the character. So the character came by and said, "You know what? I forgot. I want to get it right." He said, "You watched it."
The most recent one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them all.
Okay, so you remember this. He said, about the leeches.
Okay. Yeah.
They never stop.
Never.
Leeches not like a parasite. The leeches always got to just keep eating.
Yep.
Keep pulling, keep taking, because they have to take life from you. And these men, they talk about life that was taken, but they give life. Mm-hmm. They had an extraordinary way of explaining the world in which live. You said it. It's no way I can, even as a black, I cannot relate to being a slave. Mm-hmm. I never was a slave.
Right.
I've never been close to a slave. Thank God.
Right.
Appreciate that. Because it's a whole different... I can't relate to it. This is why his narrative is so good. This is why I call him. You went to your ancestral home this summer, but you still went in the potato famine.
Right.
You can read about it, but that history is there. But you see it. You see it evidence and say how you was moved by going places and things like that. It's always going to be there. And these people, these men, capture a moment of time and have a relationship when they should never had a relationship.
Right.
And that's the power of it. This unlikely friendship situation that never happened, but they was drawn together by their times. The one thing I love about Frederick Douglass, that he was able to, and a lot of Lincoln people they're not gonna like this statement. So I was watching, and I didn't know this. I was watching the History Channel documentary on Grant. Mm-hmm. And
great one, by the way. Highly recommended.
One of the best. I think it's the best one out there. The way, because it's great to me because I didn't know this about Ulysses Grant, because Ulysses Grant is in the popular culture, he was a drunk.
Right.
A drunk president, no.
But that's a narrative.
That's a narrative.
That's a narrative.
And the narrative is the truth if you don't go further.
Yep.
And so looking at it, Frederick Douglass said Lincoln was all right, but Grant was the one that won a peace. Yeah. He's the one that put his life on the line for he's the one that ensured that he brought down this rebellion and ensured a freedom. And people don't really understand it. He always told the truth in these moments. And what I like about him, I'm gonna read it. What I like about when you read their writings, you can put yourself in the moment, and you can feel what they was going through, what they were dealing with, and how dangerous it was, how unpopular it was, how deadly it was to have these thoughts. I mean, we you know, it's easy for us. We know we say we have our own opinion. We say we want to say, but in those times, it was dangerous to be an abolitionist. It was dangerous to be against a power structure. What the Irish did when they came here, they said, you know what? I can pass for this. I'm going to put my place in this power structure. This is why racism is a fiction, but racism is real because it's based on a power structure. Right. And where do you find yourself in that power structure? And so that's,
So Frederick Douglass is also quoted. So that what the quote I read was only half of the quote when he says the Irish who at home readily sympathize with the oppressed everywhere are instantly taught when they step foot on our soil to hate and despise us. Comma, sir, he's speaking to O'Connell, sir, the Irish American will one day find out his mistake. Now, a lot weighs on the fact that mistake doesn't get realized, right? And so when we talk about the whitewashing of history, O'Connell and Douglas have been grossly whitewashed, right? Unless you're a real scholar and you go dig and try to find things about them, right? But that's like Grant, that is part of a narrative of control, right? Imagine a world where there was an O'Connell-Douglas relationship here, like there was between these two men. And what I mean by that is, imagine if the Irish in this country, who make up, I think 16 or 17% of the entire U.S. population is Irish. There are more Irish descendants living here than there are Irish people in Ireland. There's a ton of Irish here. Imagine if this group was told, you were not white prior to 1865. You were not considered white in this country. As a matter of fact, if you go look at newspapers, there are pictures of Irish people that look like apes and dogs and things like that. I think it'd be different. Imagine if they were told what was said in newspapers about the Irish in the 1850s. Here are some quotes. Among the Irish, the commonality takes to dirt digging more naturally than to anything else. They are dirty in their persons and admit pigs into their mud cabins, which they themselves occupy. They are good servants if you deal harshly with them, as a master does with a dog. But the moment you are disposed to be familiar with them, they're all over you, jumping against you and laying their dirty paws on your clean clothes, as if you were no better than they. You would think from the 1850s they were talking about black people. No, we're talking about the Irish, right? Because the Irish were not considered white. They were Celtic, not Anglo. And that's what O'Connell was dealing with in Ireland. That's what Douglas was dealing with here. But heaven forbid these two very large groups in this country actually realize they have shared trauma. Just imagine if the Irish, like O'Connell wished, understood they have more in common with the African American than they do the Anglo in this country.
Well, it's like King said in the Birmingham letter, privileged group, once you have a privilege, it's hard to take it away, and also more hard to let it go. Right. I got this privilege, and so therefore I'm not going to let it go, because the only why the Irish are with it because it was a coalescence of power, and that's what it's about. And now that I got this privilege, no, it's not going to be because privileged groups seldom give up their privilege. You know, they just don't do it.
Right. Yeah. And so once the Irish got here and they realized they didn't have to be on the lower rung like they were in Europe, they jumped at it. And if I'm being honest, you should tell the truth, but especially on this platform, we should be honest. I can't say that I blame them for making the choice. Here's what I mean by that. I'm not saying what they did was wrong. It was wrong. But I think it would be arrogant of me to sit here in 2022 and say, well, if I lived in 1846 and I got shipped out of Ireland because I was starving to death, and I showed up here, I would side with the slave. I would fight to the death for them. I would let my family get murdered for people I don't even know. I can't say I would do that. Yeah. I'd like to hope that I would do that, but the reality is, like Frederick Douglass, I have never been in these positions, so I don't know. Yeah. Don't be arrogant, I guess is what I would say.
Also, don't set yourself to just be flat out just, in other words, I said like this to try to pick people. If I stood up there and made that statement, if my students knew about the culture of what slavery was, and I stood up as a white person and said that I would have did what you just did, what you just said, and if I would have been here, I would have no credibility. Yeah. Because one, it's impossible for me to even make that decision from my 1965 to now American mindset. We don't want to give up things now. You mean to tell me? I think about it. I just really think about this. We don't want to give up. I'm just want to be real. It's people I know that if their car broke down, or if this thing called a cell phone, they would lose their mind, lose their walk with God, lose their relationship with God, go off on a wife or a husband. They would lose everything. You think you're gonna sit there and tell me you would be a slave?
Imagine if they lost AC.
I'm not the man. We've been in church, and the AC went out in church, and people sitting there complaining, saying that they're not gonna come to church because you have no AC, and you would be a slave. Yeah, a slave, not just somebody, poor person, a slave.
Property.
Yeah, come on, chattel property. Well, you're not even a name. You just, no. So, if an American stood up and said that everybody walk out on it because, so you might as well just say what you said. You hope you might make a decision, but even with that, it's probably just. I was just going to say no. I'm going to.
I'm going to do what doesn't get me killed, right?
we made a decision right now. I'm going to take the privileged side.
Yeah, of course I am.
If I'm going, I love the Ray Charles movie.
That is a really good movie.
Remember the scene where he's loved these guys, his friends, his managers, right?
Oh yeah.
And they say, I'm going to stay with you, I'm going to stay with you. And then other company came along and said, hey, we're this. And he said, "Can you match it?" Friendship is one thing, love one thing. But can you match the offer?
Can you make this? Can you match this money?
He left, right? Because they couldn't match the money. So he wasn't wrong. It was a business decision, and it doesn't mean he wasn't friend. So we got to realize when we say statements like that, when and particularly we get in the church, we get on these church platforms, we get these bishops' collars and all that kind of stuff. We start saying things like that. This is why you lose your audience. Yeah, we need to stop saying things like this. Oh, I'm from black. Oh, if I was a slave, I would have done that. You don't know what you'd have done.
You really don't.
It's easy for you to say a free a person who never don't have any concept of it. Right. What you would do in a freer society now.
Right.
Yeah, you would do it now.
Of course you would.
Do you understand? And I get it with this. I say, because watch the Emmett Till movie, right? And the people go get Emmett Till, right? And I got so mad. I'll just call the police. That was the police. Y'all need to understand context.
Yeah. It's not what it is now.
In 1955, rural Mississippi, black people couldn't call the police on white people.
Fact.
What are you talking about?
As a matter of fact, they had separate police forces. And
so, as if you making yourself feel better because we talk about things in the context of and this is why this is so good to talk about, because even with this time frame and reading the Word of God, we've all talking about keep things in proper content. You don't want to talk about, okay, y'all want to go to the Bible? We see in the Bible where those Christians got beat up and they said
stoned,
don't say Jesus' name no more. And they was got to get beat. How many of us are running to get beat? Running to get put in prison? come stop this.
Well, I mean, y'all are out here. Y'all get called out on TikTok, and you think you're being oppressed. So I mean, come on.
It's like, come on. Yeah. So,
somebody hurt your feelings or challenged a thought on TikTok, and now you're this oppressed group of people. Grow up, man. Come on.
And I'll talk about the end. I talked to Bishop Hood. It just really was disgusting. But yeah, that's a great point. I want to read this from Douglas Wright. This is kind of what we was talking about and how he writes. Now think about this one. This is a man who was not he was born a slave, didn't know his birthday. He celebrated his birthday on February 14th because that's the day he chose.
Right.
Was taught to read and write. Look at this writing. Look how this writer takes you into his world.
Yeah. He
says 11 and a half days has gone, and I have crossed 3,000 miles of the perilous deep. Instead of a democratic government, I'm under a monarchy. Instead of a bright blue sky of America, I'm covered with the soft gray fog of the Emerald Isles, Ireland. Breath and lo, the child slave becomes a man. I gaze around in vain for one who will question my equality. You hear what he said? I gaze around in vain for one who will question my equal humanity, claim as his slave, or offer me an insult. I employ a cab. I am seated beside white people. I reach the hotel. I enter the same door. I'm shown into the same parlor. I dine at the table, and no one is offended. I find myself regarded and treated at every turn with the kindness and deference paid to white people. When I go to church, I am met by no upturned noses and scornful lips to tell me we don't allow the N-word in here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, this man is taking you into his world. Mm-hmm. Now, think about him. He was a slave, and look what he's describing. I'm not looked at funny. I'm not turning. I can sit with white people. I can get in the cab with white people. Ooh, right. I can do this with white people. He's telling you the world he came from and the not where he entering. And that's juxtaposition to how this is such a beautiful story. Juxtaposition how you put this side by side. How when the Irish go to America, they become what he says that he hates, but then he loves over here. Right. And they become what he... And it's such an interesting dynamic how he goes to their country and he's treated not equal as whites. Right. But when they come here, the white getting this power dynamic and they start treating them unequal. Right. That's just...
And to me, that lays bare the falsity of race as a scientific thing. It's a power structure. That's all it is.
It's a creation. It's
a created structure. Yes. That existed in the United States and existed in the British Empire. Right. I guarantee you, if he'd have crossed the water into England, it'd been a different story. It'd been very different.
Oh, we know that's
in England, right? But in Ireland, and even in Ireland's national anthem, they have a stanza that says, "No more will our island be home to the despot or the slave." Right? Never again. We will not have despots here. We won't have slaves here. Right? That's in our national anthem. Right? Or not ours. That's in Ireland's national anthem. So so that's fascinating. It's fascinating how just a culture changes this race issue. Not a skin tone, not a color, not a science, just a change in venue. Yeah, that's amazing.
That is, and that just moved me how he put us in his world. He put us in from my 21st century mind. I'm like, see, that's why. What are you talking about?
Right.
We're
sitting here.
I travel the world all the time, but I got to go to his world. Right. I got to go to his context. And that's how we grow and understand that this world hasn't always been the same place. And how do we get better? Even looking at Jesus and the apostles, we're not living in their world. Water was dangerous back then.
Yeah.
This is why.
Very dangerous.
They're going to shoot me down there. He turned the water into wine. Not grapefruit juice.
That's right. Because
wine was more healthier
it was safer.
And less dangerous to drink. That's just this is a fact. It wasn't Walter's grapefruit juice to make yourself feel good, but Jesus wouldn't drink wine. Yes, he would.
Yes, he would. Yes, he would.
He created the wine.
Yes, he did.
But see, this is what we do to make ourselves.
We twist the narrative.
Because, we got purifying systems. Did they have that?
They didn't have none of that. They didn't even know to boil water at that point. Most people didn't know to even boil the water.
And you love Paul, right? Well, he said drink a little wine.
A little bit.
I blaspheme him now too. We just blaspheme everybody now.
Oh man, right? House of Dragons, wine. We're done. We're getting canceled. Yeah. So I guess the last thing I want to touch on is narratives, right, have kind of blinded us historically to these, not necessarily just these two people, but the message that they were bringing, right? This idea, which maybe we consider now crazy, but at the time, these very simple ideas of black people are human beings, not property. Irish people are human beings, not a way to make money for the British Empire, right? These very common small things. But over time, it's necessary for power structures to kind of muddy these narratives. And I'll give you an example, and then I definitely want to hear, because what I'll talk about is, at least for the Irish American experience, kind of where I think the problem is, right? So on social media once, I saw this meme, right? And this meme had the Lucky Charms guy, right, with the rainbow and all that. And it said on the top, it said, "The Irish were slaves, but do you hear us complaining?" And then on the bottom, it said, "You don't, because the Irish aren't inner explicitive word for a female body part," right? Here's my issue, right? I mean, there's a lot of issues with that, but it very succinctly, it kind of describes how the narrative has gotten muddied and O'Connell's message has been lost, right, on Irish Americans. And a lot of Irish Americans, I watched this happen firsthand in Ireland. A lot of Irish Americans do not understand Irish culture and history. They don't understand their own history. They have no concept of just how much oppression actually occurred in Ireland, how much what it took for their ancestors to get here and become part of white supremacy, right? But let's unpack that a little bit. So there's some realities in that post that aren't there. Number one, the Irish were never chattel slavery. They not in Ireland, not here, not anywhere. The Irish were never slaves. I'm going to say that again because some of y'all get confused, and I'm just going to say it again. The Irish were never slaves in the way African Americans were slaves in this country. They were never considered property. Were they considered subhuman? Yes. Were they treated poorly in Ireland and murdered by the millions? Yes. But the fact is, they were never property, right? So what it does is it twists the narrative, and we get into the oppression Olympics, right? Where instead of coming together and go, wow, I got this trauma in my past, we have this generational trauma in our past of oppression. You have this generation of trauma of oppression in your history. Let's come together, talk about it. Let's figure out ways to... Instead, it's my oppression was worse than your oppression. Right, and so we start the oppression Olympics, where the cultures compete with each other on who got treated the worst, off of lies, right? Those are just flat out historical lies. I would challenge anybody on planet Earth to give me any evidence that the Irish were ever chattel slaves. You won't find it. So, where I guess when I hear O'Connell and Douglas, when I hear them from the past. And I hear things like Douglas said, and I hear things like O'Connell said, it frustrates me as an Irish American to see stuff like this on social media because there's no understanding of the history. It is clear that the narrative has been muddied and twisted to the point where instead of doing what Douglas and O'Connell did, coming together for the cause of liberation, now it's coming against each other to prove who had it worse in history. And... you know, I can't speak from the African-American side of that experience, but on the Irish-American side, they'll eat this stuff up wholesale. They will just eat this up. And the message of O'Connell has just been completely lost on Irish-Americans. Now, to be fair, it wasn't a popular message when it came out, right? Because it called out the fact that Irish Americans really weren't Anglo and they really weren't white. Mm-hmm. The only reason, what it did was it called out the reality that the only reason the Irish were white here is because there were so many of them. If they didn't let them in, they could just vote them out. And so that's my struggle, and where I see where O'Connell's side of this message needs to come back.
Yeah. Well, my take on it is, I've always taken this, I understand it, and it don't surprise me, and here's why. Because we hate to feel, as human beings, we connect to other human beings. Mm-hmm. And most of us live in a moment, we don't get in context. And we simply want, this is why this critical race theory and all this stuff is out and so popular. Because people hate to feel bad. People don't want to believe that in this country that we enslave people. They simply just don't want to believe that. Mm-hmm. This is why critical race theory sells, because you shouldn't feel bad about something you didn't do. Mm-hmm. But you think...
No kidding.
I won't hear about a woman getting raped. I didn't rape anybody, but it still makes me feel bad, and I hope that person gets prosecuted. But just because I don't hear about it isn't stopping that incident from going on.
Right.
That's just but this notion that if we tell you something in your past, we got to frame it where it's not truthful because we don't want to make you feel bad. Mm-hmm. This is the issue that we deal with. We don't want to say, we went over there, because we are we're one heartbeat from an ancestor. Mm-hmm. In a moment, we took people, we stole people, we enchained them, we enslaved them, and then we had to have a war where 500,000 plus Americans had to get killed. We don't want to believe that we did that, and all we don't want to believe that we could be that bad, evil people, and so it just erases these narratives and create false narrative. Well, it wasn't that bad, or I love when they say, well, they had slaves in the Bible. Well, okay, in the Bible, fine, they did. I'm not arguing, but David had a man killed that had his wife in the Bible. Can Biden do that? I mean, what are we talking? Don't miss me with your trying to equivalency thing. That's it.
Yeah.
It don't make what you're doing right because they did something in the Bible.
Exactly.
See, that one said, well, and I seen the Irish. Well, the Irish were slaves. Okay, even if that was true, which is not, it still doesn't make me feel bad about my ancestors.
Exactly.
That don't make me feel better.
Exactly.
It's worse. You making it worse. If the Irish were slaves, we were slaves too. If that's your argument, which is not true, but my point is that makes it worse.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Wrong is wrong.
Right.
And it goes back to what I'm saying. Here's my close with this. It's what I love about O'Connell. He teaches us a lesson. He teaches to white people a lesson. Here's what we want from, as a black person, we want from you as a white person. It's not enough just not to be racist. O'Connell was anti-racist.
Yes.
That's a difference with a distinction.
Right.
Most people are not racist, but they're not active and speak out against racism.
Right.
And this is the problem. When the privileged group, as we talked about, don't say anything, because they would do it because it's wrong and stand up against it. And I relate it to, again, NFL. I take two quarterbacks that I know, either Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. If either one of them had knelt with Kaepernick, he'd been in the league. You are not going to keep Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers in the league.
No.
What's going to happen? 5 years and Stetson? No. Mm-hmm. And guess what? The whole narrative would have been, well, we got them. But see, we won't do that.
Right.
They might put the hand on the shoulder.
Right.
Say what you, but no, be in the struggle. This is what O'Connell does. Nobody's saying Brady's a racist.
Right.
Or Rodgers a racist. Well, are you anti-racist? Because you see what's going on. You see what's going on. But you are in a privileged group, so surely Tom Brady wouldn't do that. He wouldn't. And so that's a narrative. And so this is what O'Connell. This is the beauty of O'Connell and Frederick Douglass. What Douglass loved about him, from my reading, is he was really the first white person he seen was he had Garrison, a non-American, that was a visceral anti-racist.
Right.
No bones about it. He took where he stood is wrong. He come against it, and so that's the beauty of their friendship. Because not that O'Connell ever been a slave, he wouldn't have been.
No.
But he understood oppression.
Right.
The key for us is we don't have to be a slave to understand oppression. You're right. We shouldn't be doing who's the most oppressed. It was wrong, period.
Yeah.
You think, why would I argue with a Native American about what they went through and our experience? They're both bad experiences.
Yeah.
We were stolen, their land was stolen from. And the Trail of Tears. It's no argument. All of it was wrong.
Right.
So we need to come together and say, all of it's wrong.
Right.
We don't get into these battles about who's the most oppressed.
Yeah.
If you know it was wrong to the image bearer of God, you stand against it.
Yeah, and that we don't, there's no silver medal in the oppression Olympics, right? Like, I mean, the biggest thing here is, instead of you trying to use the oppression that occurred to my ancestors to smudge out and wipe out the oppression that your ancestors went through, or the oppression that Native Americans went through, that is exactly what the power structure wants, right? Because when we act like that, we are propping up the power structure, and in this case, that power structure is white supremacy. If we would instead have the courage, and this is what I love about the O'Connell Douglas, they had the courage to call it out, act on it, damn the consequences, right? There were heavy consequences for both of these people, right?
Yeah.
Douglas lived. I am certain Douglas lived his entire life in fear in the United States.
Well, until slavery ended, yeah.
I have no doubt.
Yeah.
And even after slavery, I mean, he probably wasn't concerned about becoming a slave again.
Right. Yeah.
But he still had to live under the Jim Crow era and this other stuff that was happening. O'Connell still had to live in a country where he may have had the education and the money, but he was still subpar.
Yeah.
Right. And he died that way. He died subpar. Right. So, to me, instead of, I think what O'Connell calls out for and what Douglas calls out for is, instead of using our oppressive histories against each other, if we would unite. 25% of the American population is African American. 16% of the American population is Irish. 2% is Native. You combine those, now I'm no math guru, but that's a sizable block of votes. Imagine what could happen if that voting block ever came together. Just imagine. Yeah. So,
as a teacher, I can kill this myth. The kids don't feel bad. It's the officials don't want. The kids don't feel bad.
Right.
They want to know the history.
Right. They want to know what happened.
The adults don't want to teach them. That's who feels bad.
Yeah. It's not the
no.
And I've said this before. No black person, no Native person, no indigenous person. No one has ever come up to me and said, "John, you need to feel bad because you're white." No one has ever done that to me. No one's ever asked that of me. Right. You know what's I think has been asked of me? To just listen. Hear it, read it, study it, understand it to the extent that you can, right? And then do something about it. Like you said, not just sitting on your laurels and going, "Well, we don't tolerate that racist stuff in our house." Well, no. I don't tolerate that racist stuff in my house. Right. I don't tolerate it in my car. I don't tolerate it in Starbucks when I'm getting my coffee. I don't tolerate it when I'm at the mall, when I'm at the airport. I don't tolerate. Don't do it around me.
In the
public domain. Yeah. I'm not going to tolerate it.
One thing to be quiet. You do publicly, like us, standing up for truth.
Right.
Yes.
So
that's the key.
Yeah, and to me, that's where O'Connell and Douglas are. It's just an amazing and very biblical, for those of you who don't like the idea that we're not talking about someone biblical, a very biblical concept of uniting for liberation, right? Just like the gospel. If the gospel is not liberating, it's not the gospel. That's right. So, that's right. All right. Hey, it was a good night. Yeah. Two amazing people from history. Yeah. Be sure to like and follow, and I know here in a couple months, we both have books coming out. Yeah. And some of the stuff you heard tonight, you might You may or may not hear from my book, or may not have used some of the manuscript tonight to talk about some things. Yeah. But they're coming out, and we're really excited for them, and we're just excited to be on this journey with you guys. So,
see you next week.
Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Bishop Brothers. Make sure to visit our page, Bishop Brothers, where you can like and follow so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, please tell a friend about the show. The brothers salute you. Until we meet again, Godspeed.